Podcasting from the Lone Star State in Southern California, you're listening to the Coma Podcast with Cody and Matt.
Hey everyone, and welcome. It is March 11th, 2021, and today we are going to be talking about a really fun, interesting topic, the phrase friend of Dorothy. There's a lot of history behind it, two possibilities where it came from. It involves the military, NCIS, an investigation on who is Dorothy, and a lot of money. We're going to be talking about that coming up next. But Matt, it is Thursday. We've almost made it through the week. How are you doing?
I'm good. So we're back on a normal recording schedule. We took last week kind of off to recover from literally everything that happened a few weeks ago, sort of caught up. So
yeah, so much
very long week.
Stuff going on over there for y'all. It was a
amazing.
storm, then other things. So yeah, a deserved little respite from it.
Yeah, I was actually watching. So I actually do watch the podcast. Excuse me. I will go to YouTube and sit and watch it. I'm subscribed to our channel from my personal channel, so I try to watch it after I've had a little bit of time to not think about the podcast, so I can objectively watch it and pay attention to it. So sitting there watching yesterday's, I'm like, and I was looking at the dates, like, oh yeah, I guess we took an entire week off of recording, but because we still did live shows, it didn't feel like we did. But
yeah,
we didn't, because when we record, everything we record, we generally put out that night or the next day. So whereas last year it could go out within 1 to 6 days. We tried to do this whole like, okay, we're gonna upload it every week, and I found that the more days we put between it, put more pressure on you, because if you had the day free, it pretty much had to go out that day, because you could have another project come up, something around the house, life, existence. Oh, going out to dinner. Okay, well, we'll deal with it when we get back. We get back at midnight and go to sleep next day, normal day. And it's like, well, and I can't. So, and how we have it set up, I can't edit for Cody. So it's all on Cody. Once my part is done, that part, it goes like to Cody.
It's out of his hands.
It is completely out of my hands. So you're just like, do you need help with anything? Not in like a, hey, get it done faster way, but hey, is there something I can do to help you take the pressure off of you? But there really isn't.
Yeah. We do want to remind everybody we're on, as Matt was saying, on YouTube. You can check out video versions of this audio podcast. And then also when we do our live shows, those are all posted up on there. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitch. Of course, we're on Twitter. You can follow us on our own personal Twitters. So lots of options to check out. We almost have content every day. When I actually wrote it down and sent it to Matt yesterday, we basically have content almost every day except for like, I think 3 days or something. So lots of stuff for you to check out. If you just listen to the podcast, there's lots of, we're doing 2 live shows, and who knows what the future will hold. So we can check out some news here, Matt, because in Texas today on Thursday, the mask mandate is ending there for y'all. The governor, we talked about it previously that the governor had lifted it, and well, it's finally happening now. So, the businesses can work and open 100% capacity as well.
Yeah.
I just saw also the baseball stadium in Arlington. Everyone can come. It's open. So
what's crazy is we're not even that far into being vaccinated. We're still in like the early phases of vaccinating people with frontline workers and people with pre-existing conditions. And I think people over age 65 can be vaccinated right now. So I think that's phase 1B. And the mask mandate's ending. Now, most places here are, even though it's not a state mandate anymore and the federal mandate was ended, most places and businesses are requiring masks to be on premises. And it's important to remember that you're talking about private property. So it can be the same as no shoes, no shirt, no service, if you remember those signs when they were really popular. It's the same thing. I
think it's going to be rough. Even in those cases, a lot of businesses.
I think we're going to see a lot of people get harassed just
Yeah.
because they can, and it's embarrassing. It is just embarrassing, and I'm more worried for like uh people targeting an employee and harassing them and this
Hmm.
creepy shit like that you see. But that is actually happening. That is real news. And one of my favorite parts of this is how Governor Abbott and as he kisses our former president's asshole, um, all of them have the vaccine. He was like the first one to get it.
Yeah.
I love that. I love
Right.
that.
I mean,
So,
I was seeing a lot of things of people who were saying that it wasn't real, like just everyday people, or they weren't wearing masks. They're the ones who are now like going out and like trying to like circumvent the system to get the vaccine. And so they're like people maybe like our age, which should be last in line if you're completely healthy. They're like circumventing the system to try to get those masks. One thing, Austin is going to still have a mask mandate. They're going to try that. I saw the Attorney General of Texas going to try to like fight that situation. They will arrest you in Austin if you are not wearing a mask, but it's not
oh
for
shit.
not wearing a mask. It is because in a business, if they're wanting you to wear a mask and you don't leave, that would be trespassing. So that is what's happening. So we'll see what happens. Uh, I also President Biden has guaranteed or has ordered 100 million more vials of the Johnson and Johnson vaccine.
Well, and
That happened
our
Wednesday,
attorney,
so that's good.
so the Texas Attorney General is Ken Paxton, who is currently indicted for I think like federal financial crimes or something right now, and it's like I just can't.
I mean, there is so much history with him and also Lieutenant Governor. But for sure, Ken Paxton, like he is basically a criminal from
Yeah,
what
he
the
is a
information
criminal.
that comes out.
Not even basically,
Um,
he is.
so it is a craziness there. One thing I saw today also, this happened yesterday on Wednesday, on Google, they have like the Google Doodles. And so they had one of like a man with a mask, and it was celebrating Dr. Wu Lin Tay. And he was someone who basically helped invent the first surgical mask. In 1910 in Manchuria, there was an unidentified disease. The Chinese government appointed him to investigate this particular disease, and he discovered it was some kind of highly contagious pneumonic plague that affected the respiratory system. And it became known as the Manchurian plague. And he designed a surgical mask of sort with cotton and gauze that included several layers of cloth to filter for inhalation. And then once he did that, he established it, got that out, hospital protocols. And then about 4 months later, that little pandemic there in Manchuria was ended. So I thought that was kind of a whole interesting thing to see that, going back all the way then, almost a year to the day that we kind of locked down here in the United States, that's where the mask was born. And some people just still don't believe in that mask. I've left you speechless.
I'm not speechless. I'm thinking before I speak. We should just change the subject because I'm probably going to start insulting a whole lot of people. I mean,
um,
it's been a year. We know that one of the biggest problems in America, one of the things that's celebrated about this country is individualism. We have the freedom to be who, in theory, who you want to be without persecution. Yeah, about that. Uh, but let's just run with it. Let's not dig into that. However, one of the worst things about our country is on the other side of individualism is a selfishness that comes with it. We all know self-preservation is important, especially for someone, and a big example, something like a frontline worker, a nurse, a doctor, a tech, people who are working these 12 and 14-hour shifts 6-7 days a week. At some point, individually, they have to be pulled out of that and given a week off to breathe, think, heal up, and go back into it. Why? Because if they don't, at some point, they're just going to collapse and die. right? So you have to do some self-care and some self-preservation, and you have to know your own body. You have to know when to say no. So, but for the average person who has no concept of anything outside their bubble, they do not, there is a rampant selfishness that is, it's not even the underbelly of American culture. It runs right along with us. It's what empowers people to scream on a Yelp review the most inappropriate things that have nothing to do with what actually might have gone wrong. It's that attitude that Americans are so known for in so many parts of the world. And it's not that, that Southern hospitality that we talk about that, we think of, we think of Texas or, the South. We think of the rampant racism and how it's not safe for us to hold David or Justin's hands walking through many, many cities. And in some places, our own cities. And we live in really blue areas. Like the enclaves we live in are very blue. And it's still nerve-wracking if I instinctively reach out and hold David's hand. So there's a selfishness that comes along with American culture. And the older I've gotten, the easier it is to see, especially seeing it in healthcare. And the same person saying, well, why can't they think of somebody else, is the same person screaming at a retail worker, a fast food cashier, when something has gone wrong that's really not that big of a deal. And it's the ultimate making mountains out of molehills. And then just throwing out this whataboutism, like, well, you can't do that. Well, what about that? We're not talking about that. And each thing is not equivalent to the other,
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like the lack of critical thinking from people who are not stupid. They're not stupid, but they do know how to talk in a way that gets their way because this is how they operated at home when they were children. This is how they fought with their siblings. This is how they argued with their parents. This is how they, argued with professors in college. There's a mentality. And when I did still have Facebook, when I would see this mentality, the same kinds of people that I'm pretty sure aren't wearing masks and don't believe in vaccines, I went to school with a very group of students. Somehow I went to a top 100 school in Florida, LOL, or at the time it was. And because of the International Baccalaureate program, we had students from all different backgrounds and cultures. And I can tell you that when I think of some of the ugliest experiences and ugliest, most selfish acts, even that I saw committed, and that's saying something because we were 2,000 teenagers crammed into a building. It was almost always little white boys and little white girls. They looked like me, and I can think of some of the cringy things I said or thought. Now, I never took it that far ever because I knew how to behave in a public setting. But I actually remember a girl being handed a broom and a dustpan in chemistry class because she had knocked something off. So the teacher got her the broom and dustpan out of like the teacher's area. And she was like, what do I do with this? And he was like, you sweep up the mess you made. She's like, what?
Oh my gosh.
He was like, you don't know how to use a broom and dustpan? She was like, no, I don't. I've never swept in my life. He's like, well, today you start. Like she had no concept of how to clean up.
Yeah.
And that mentality, I remember thinking, well, that explains a lot because this girl was a raging bitch. And not like teenage girl bitchy, but like she was just a jerk of a person. And I'm like, God, where does this come from? Because I was like Cinderella at home. It makes me think of like when I thought of my friends that had no concept of chores, how to organize, how to take care of themselves. They tended to have this brand of selfishness. Yeah, they always acted like they knew so much more, but these are people who they didn't even know what laundry detergent to use. They didn't know that if you use too much of the concentrated kind that you can break yourself out in hives. How does that happen? Because my ex-husband did it to me when he washed my scrubs one afternoon. He used a whole cup of OxyClean concentrate right before I went to work. And by the time I got to work, the moment I started sweating, I broke out in hives. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. But he was the baby of 3. Even growing up in a financially disadvantaged family, he was still spoiled and it had he had no concept that how much his actions impact others. He had no concept that what he thought was new and shiny and just totally groundbreaking in his thought process was something that the average person that has any sort of sense of community, and that they're not the only one at the center, they're not the center of our population, would be like, yeah, no shit, you know. But to him, things like that, I mean,
Yeah.
it is not just little rich white kids that act like that. You know, it's not just pretty boys with abs that act like that. Sense of entitlement comes in many forms. And we're all guilty of it. At some point, all of us say or do something that's really selfish, cringy, whatever's going on in our head. But the people around us, hopefully, if you have if your friends are not yes people, you're like, oh, they're just probably having a bad day. But if it's regular behavior, you might find that you're the common denominator in your
Yeah.
problems. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. America. um, Not surprising, also, Matt. This week, Congress finally passed the COVID relief bill, and
At the time of
the
this
no,
recording, about 15 minutes ago.
no surprising is that it was basically on party lines 220 to 211. And I'm just going to read some of these things here. And so this is some of the things that are in the bill. It's going to provide direct payments up to $1,400 a person. That's for individuals earning less than 75,000, married couples earning less than 150,000. It's going to call for $300 to federal boost weekly jobless payments. That extends that through September 6th. It's going to make $10,200 worth of benefits tax-free for households with annual incomes less than 150,000. The legislation also is going to provide $350 billion to states, local governments, territories, and tribes. It's going to increase food stamp benefits 15%. That's going to go through September. $20 billion is going to go to state and local governments to help low-income households with rent assistance, and utility bills, which that's going to be a big one. It has $10 billion going to help struggling homeowners pay for their mortgage, utilities, and property taxes. $5 billion for states to help homeless and provide safe, social distance housing for them. It's going to beef up tax credits for families and certain low-income workers. So that's going to be really helpful, those tax credits. It does not, however, reinstate paid family sick leave. That was in the previous COVID bill, but it will still provide tax credits to employers who provide that. And that's basically if you get COVID, you have to be off 2 weeks, or you are close to somebody who has COVID and you have to stay home for 2 weeks. Businesses no longer have to pay you for that. But if your company wants the tax credits, they will still do that. Money, $125 billion to schools to help with filtration and reduce class sizes. It's going to help with Affordable Care Act stuff. We talked about that a little bit. It's also going to help with COBRA. It's going to basically pay for that if you want that through September. And $14 billion for vaccines, 8.5 for struggling rural hospitals. So I say all of this to say the Republicans voted against that.
Right. And there were several things that we all wanted in the bills, and I understand that. And yes, I would have liked them too, not just for myself, but David and I are not in an urgent. We're not like we're not one step from crisis. We're probably like five. We're it's not it's there. It's not even on the horizon. It's closer than that. But we're not in urgent, and I see the importance of what this means for so many people. We're a huge country. We have 300 plus million people here.
Mm-hmm.
Everything cannot be fixed in one act. There's going to be people that disagree. There's people so out of touch with reality. They have no idea what things cost. And which is one reason it's like, if you want to run for office, get out there and run for office. We
Exactly.
need people that look like the rest of us up there in office.
And we say it all the time. It begins like at your city council or different things like that in your local areas. Like you can get started at the local level to help. And then, that's where change really happens. It builds from the bottom up.
Right. And so I want to just remind everybody that this huge piece of legislation has passed, and that's fantastic. So the next thing is yes, let's keep working on, just because we did not win on the wages. I know the minimum wage increase was huge, and I was really hoping it would happen because I grew up with my parents. I remember watching, so when I was probably 8, minimum wage was $4.35 an hour. I remember this because there was a big announcement from Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton walked out onto the podium and said Americans can live making minimum wage at $4.35 an hour, and my parents were pissed. Like pissed. Now, that would have been, and I was 8 years old in 1994. Clinton took office in 1992. So I had to have been in that range because I was still very young, and I haven't lived with my parents since 1995 or 6. So I live in Ohio at this point. So from 1992 to 1993, that range of time, to now in 2021, minimum wage has gone up by $3. What is it now, like 7 something?
Yeah, I think it's
Now,
around
it's
that.
true, a lot of places do pay a bit more than minimum wage. Like when I started working, minimum wage was $5.50 an hour. When I was 16 in 2004. So think of that. 10 plus years later, minimum wage had gone up $1.
Well, yeah,
And
some
I was hired at $6.25 an hour, and that was considered great because it was more than minimum wage by like 70 cents. And the reason for that, that was for Famous Footwear. My manager was like, I could not get anybody in here if I offer them $5.50 an hour. And she's like, I only need you 10 hours a week, so I'll happily give you an
yeah,
extra 80 cents and 70, 80 cents an hour to like make it better for you. And she's like, a couple dollars does not affect my budget that
yeah,
much, where I can't give an employee, and so, but we have to think, like, I worked for USAA for 2 years when I moved to San Antonio, and growing up, there's this big push about we shouldn't talk about salaries. And we should talk about salaries. We should know what's being made, and it should not be a big secret, because it's not a ding against the employee. It's a ding against the HR, but it creates infighting among the employees. They're focused on that, not on, hey, this multi-billion-dollar corporation has the money to do this. Just they want to walk away with $8 to $10 million bonuses.
yeah.
Really?
I mean, it all comes down to kind of what we've talked about in the past of capitalism in America.
My point is, I got a 25-cent raise after my first year.
Yeah.
25 cents. My base salary was just under 50,000. Now, I worked a shit ton of overtime, and USAA handed out amazing bonuses until this year. It could be 10-15% of your annual salary. So you would get this tiny little raise and then this bonus, and the idea was like, oh, well, look at that. Yes, it is nice to receive $8,000 to $10,000 in one swing. I always kept my taxes the same, and my 401k fully contributing, because they do an 8% 401k match. So I had a massive amount taken out of my paycheck every week for my 401k and my taxes.
Yeah.
But because of that bonus, you move up as your base salary very, very, very slowly. So what they ended up having to do was they gave everybody a base pay raise, and they yanked bonuses. They're not the same anymore. And they ultimately just didn't work. This is something that is a big topic in the news right now, and between anybody that makes minimum wage or ever lived on minimum wage. Don't be discouraged. Celebrate this passing as a huge win for a lot of people, even if it's not you. A lot of people who really needed this win, that were not just rich people, will get that. And then keep writing legislation, keep encouraging, call your Congress people, call your senators, write their offices, show that support for what you want, even if you live in a red state. I think Senator Ted Cruz, or Grandpa Munster is my current rep, but I like Grandpa Munster more. He offered a lot more to culture and the world than Ted Cruz. That man is a walking shit stain. Like, you can just smell his deceit and lies from here. Hell, half the Republican Congress people don't even like him, and that's more than that. But then we have Nazi Josh Hawley. That's cool too. And
it's interesting.
Madison, so
they're offering legislation for minimum wage increase, but there's a lot of interesting things that go with that because it is tied to immigration reform. Obviously, this is a whole big topic that we should talk about because it differs from city to city, state to state. There's lots of weird arguments for and against it, and that like businesses are going to go out, they're going to go out of business by increasing the wages. People are going to lose their jobs. And a lot of the data does not show that. There's some cities that have increased it. It's obviously done well in those cities. A lot of this, when they say people are going to lose the jobs, when you look at numbers of job losses, because there would be job losses, but I think when you look in that number, and I'll have to look at it in more detail, but it's because some people are working 2 or 3 jobs. So if the minimum wage was increased, they would not have to work those 2 or 3 jobs. So yes, they would not be working those jobs. So you would see those jobs go away. But it is not necessarily because of the increase. It's just that, hey, I can work just one job now. Yeah, it's a whole crazy thing with that. And also, like you were saying, hopefully they'll bring up legislation again. I believe there was some Democrats, a few of them who were against putting minimum wage into the COVID relief bill because they felt it did
Yeah.
not go with COVID relief. They wanted the COVID relief bill to be specifically and only about COVID relief. So that is an argument, so there's multiple
Right.
arguments. We'll see what happens. Ultimately, probably for it to pass, is going to have to get rid of the filibuster. And so that's a whole big conversation in itself. So yeah, just keep your pressure on. And a lot of it is just going to be on a handful of Democratic senators, obviously. And then to wrap this up, Matt, this was kind of some exciting news. The first transgender news anchor in Bangladesh, Tashnuva Ana Shashir, she read her first 3-minute daily news bulletin on Monday, which was International Women's Day. And so the government estimates there's about 11,500 transgender people in Bangladesh, but some of the LGBTQ rights campaigners in the area say it's probably about 100,000. So, like, that's a big thing for her, for the community there in Bangladesh, to have someone as a news reader on screen so that they can see it. I feel like it's kind of like we've talked about in the past of, where we have like Anderson Cooper now and a handful of other reporters that you have that are in these positions that young people can see and look up to somebody who is in a profession like that. Coming up next, we are going to be talking about Friends of Dorthy. What is it all about, and what is up with that NCIS investigation? That's next. Okay, and we are back, and today our topic of conversation is Dorothy's friend. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, but there was a phrase. It still is around today, actually. It's used a lot on cruise ships, actually. But Matt, who's Dorothy? What's going on? What is this phrase, friend of Dorothy, that people had been using? It started kind of like World War II. It was used a lot. It's used a lot in the military at a certain point in time. What's up?
Right. So before we get started, so the story, there's 2 parts to this of what we're talking about today. And it was found in a Twitter thread by David. He was reading something and he goes, "Hey, this might be something you find interesting." He goes, so he takes this big swig of his water and then reads this story to me. And I thought it was really fascinating. And so I thought we could talk about it. So friend of Dorothy is a euphemism for being, if you say yes, that's basically terminology for yes, I'm gay or LGBT, etc. Now, to remember, in World War II era, the language used to discuss our community was a lot more narrow, a lot more limited, and certain words kind of meant like everything. Like when a lot of people, straight people tend to talk about gays, they literally mean everybody, even though properly we would say LGBTQ plus, etc. So just preface that this isn't a binary, non-binary set of terms. This is just friend of Dorothy, meaning if you said yes, it was a way to discuss LGBT kind of in code and in secret, because if you remember, this was a crime And it was
Yeah.
absolutely not legal
Illegal.
to be. Yeah, I mean, people were fired from Cracker Barrel for being gay up into the 90s, you know. So the story, uh, the easiest way to describe it is, you know, many of our listeners, if you're our age, you would probably remember, depending on when you came out or became more aware of what the community was, or that it even existed, was probably more of what it was in the 90s when it wasn't quite mainstream, but you might have known who RuPaul was, or you saw Tu Wong Fu, or something like that. But our older listeners or family members or anybody that you know that's older would remember a time when being gay wasn't just a problem, quote unquote, quote end quote. It was straight up not legal and could get you tossed from your job, the military. You could lose government clearance, things like that. Excuse me, I just hiccuped. So the military essentially got wind of, I'll just give you kind of the abridged version. The military essentially got wind of this code, Friend of Dorothy, and this happened in the 80s. And so they launched this massive search for this elusive Dorothy, taking it literally that Dorothy was this woman that was like the at the epicenter of this.
Well, I
of
mean,
the gays.
if
So
if
they could go
if
ahead.
they kept hearing the investigation, and when the investigation was ongoing, if you just imagine if you keep hearing people say, "Are you a friend of Dorothy?" Yes, I'm a friend of Dorothy. And if you hear that a lot, you're like, "Who is Dorothy? What is she doing? Is she like selling military secrets? Are we getting like?" Obviously, it's going to pique somebody's interest. If you're saying, "I'm a friend of Dorothy," are you a friend of Dorothy? Like that must have been just crazy.
Right. So as the military got wind of it, they launched this massive, expensive hunt for the elusive Dorothy in the hopes that she would turn out all these who was gay in the military over for investigation. And ultimately was pointless because Dorothy, quote unquote, does not exist. Now, I want to point out that this illustrates something that I think is extremely important. A lot of the people at the top of chains, executives, restaurants, corporations, government, are dumb as shit. Are absolutely dumb as shit. They have never really read a book. They've never really read anything about symbolism or critical thinking, and they really don't use critical thinking skills. Because how fucking stupid do you have to be to not figure out in the course of a very expensive investigation when you have a massive budget to whoever you want to not be able to not have one friendly gay person in your life to be like, there's no such thing.
Well, it was
You're
probably they
telling
didn't
me,
want to say that. If even if they were friends, they were like, "Well, we can't tell them."
right?
You
But you
know.
have to think anybody that would have been caught by this, even if they were totally innocent, had no idea what the hell you were talking about. You do not want to be on the receiving end of a government body doing an investigation when it's something like sexuality because somehow somebody cares about that, you know.
And again, it
Uh,
wasn't that it was illegal to be gay in the military. Like it was an illegal thing overall.
yeah, this is before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell was seen as some kind of like win because, oh, well, yeah, you can serve, just don't ask, don't tell. And it's very wonderful to be like, oh, well, you know what? That's fine. I don't want people to ask me about my service. Well, you would still be tossed out of the military if somebody suspected you were gay and they came over and saw a picture of you and your same-sex partner or whatever in your house. People were terminated from the military for that too. Not to mention exposure in your community. Your family may not even know. And there's a lot, there's more to it than just somebody fighting out at work. Lots of people get really upset about other people's sexuality for some odd reason. So let's point out that these people at the top doing these investigations were so dumb that they were not able to possibly consider that this was a figure of speech in code. That's it. That's all it was. There was nothing more to it than that. And these same people, this was only the 1980s. Some of these people are probably still in their offices or working somewhere else in the government or just recently retired, which means decades of their influence is still floating around these offices. Now, for the average person, you might think, oh, well, that's times past. No, it's a stench, and most LGBTQ people can smell it. And we're quite aware when somebody that stupid, and I don't have any other words for it, that freaking dumb, is in charge of something or speaking on something. Or it's kind of like how Madison Cawthorn is a homeschooled, faith-based homeschooled, self-aggrandizing dumb shit who is out there talking about, just flapping his jaws about how smart he is and how qualified he is and how he cares. And everything about him is a complete lie. But he completely confidently goes out there and tells these lies because I think he believes them about himself, even though all of them have been proven wrong. That mentality, that lack of critical thinking, that lack of thinking things through is what is in charge. And again, huge part of American culture contributes to this completely narrow-minded way of thinking. And yeah, here we are. So,
And
it's not, things like that are not the cause. Those are symptoms. People like, Cawthorn and the people in charge of these investigations that, even if they didn't agree with the investigations, they followed orders and went along with them. How many people's lives do you think were ruined in the course of these investigations? I have found Twitter threads of former government officials who no longer work in government who were terminated for their sexuality in the 80s over these investigations because they were suspected, tossed out, punished, threatened. How freaking scary to not only have your livelihood threatened, but if people come out, you can be murdered for it, especially, before
yeah,
now.
I think I was watching, there's a show on Apple called For All Mankind, and it's basically the space race between America and Russia, but it's if things had been done differently, and if like women had been included from the beginning. And it's like a really weird, they change up history and how history is, and like what could have happened. And it's super interesting, and just a super fun show. So be sure and check it out if you haven't, because it is a great show on Apple Plus. But one part that they didn't really change is that one of the guys who works at NASA is gay, and then one of the female astronauts is a lesbian. But in the show, they have to like pretend they're a couple and like get married and everything, even though they have other lives, because it was illegal. And in the show itself, she wouldn't get to go to space. He would lose his job. But that part of the story and history did not change, because that's how it was during this period of time, and that you had to hide that if you were, and not let, if you were working for the government, especially anybody in the government, know, because there would be investigations by FBI or NCIS and whatnot. So the term, though, Matt, Dorthy, because who is Dorothy? But it seems that there's two options, like you were saying. One of them was it could have come from the Wizard of Oz, and one of those would be from The Road to Oz, which was the sequel to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And that's where there was a character introduced called Polychrome, who is meeting up with Dorothy to travel. And said, you have some queer friends, Dorothy. And she replies, the queerness doesn't matter as long as they're friends. And apparently there's numerous references to LGBTQ characters and relationships, including possible innuendo about bisexuality. When Dorothy asks the Scarecrow which way to go on the Yellow Brick Road, and he says, of course, some people go both ways. And it's interesting when you look at that, you look at the Wizard of Oz itself, as far as the three characters, and they're kind of all outcasts to a point. They're like, there's something wrong. Then you have the Wicked Witch of the West, could be metaphors for different things, and the Flying Monkeys could be metaphors for different things about the difficulties of coming out, which I thought was interesting. I guess I've never really thought of it in that mindset, but now that I have, it's kind of like all you see, that there is so many different metaphorical looks within the Wizard of Oz that do relate to LGBTQ things, and also obviously there's a rainbow, and so that is where I guess Dorothy, are you a friend of Dorothy? Because Dorothy, in these books, some people believe, And then there was also another one that I saw that comes from Dorothy Parker. And she lived in New York City, and she was a humorist and critic and a defender of civil rights. And she was really big in the social circles in the 1920s and 1930s, and she had a lot of gay men. And at the time, prohibition was in place, and so there was a lot of speakeasies. And one of those phrases to get into the speakeasy was, "I'm a friend of Dorothy." And that allowed them into the speakeasy. So two two possible things of, are you a friend of
Right.
Dorothy? But both of them make sense, and they're both really interesting stories. Matt brought this to me, and I'd never heard of "Are you a friend of Dorothy?"
I
Really?
had heard of the friend of Dorothy. I did not know about I knew about so I did know about the investigation in the 80s because I'd read Twitter threads about it and other stuff I'd read about history, but I didn't know they were really connected to that. I never read into the investigation so much to know where it started. I was just reading, I had read a lot of stories about people who just said, I was investigated in the 80s. Here's my story of when they called me in. And they posted some of the stuff that, because they had taken their own notes when they got home and wrote down everything that happened because they were afraid. So they noted everything and kept their records. But I didn't realize they were connected, and I like the stories behind them. I mean, like you said, they both make sense. But like I said, the government went on that only that there was nothing behind it other than these possible stories. There was no actual Dorothy that was filtering gay men into some kind of nefarious circle jerk, you know. Sorry, I
um,
had to squeeze one in there. Like, uh,
I also thought was interesting, like I mentioned, it's still used to a point today, some. And it like actually on the cruise ships, like in the 80s, I think, there was a lot of gays and lesbians that wanted to like meet up. And so they wanted the ship to publicize, and they have like daily cruise activity lists. They wanted to publicize that they were like have like a meetup, basically, but then the cruise lines didn't want to just like publish like, here's the gays going to go meet. And so they started publishing "Meeting of the Friends of Dorothy." And it's not unusual for cruise ships to do this because they had started doing in the lineup, the daily cruise activities, "Friends of Bill W." And that was for Alcoholic Anonymous group meetups on the ship. And so in some of the ship daily cruise activities, they would have "Meeting of the Friends of Dorothy." So I don't know,
that's really
maybe
fascinating.
it's a good name for a podcast.
A friend of Dorothy.
But
So
yeah,
maybe that's what we'll call the my. So we're talking about having me do a segment on Mondays where it's just me for 30-ish minutes. Maybe we'll call the segment "A Friend of Dorothy's."
I love it. I love it.
You
But
like
I
it?
really, I guess I'm not thinking, I guess in some respects I've thought about it, but like actually going through and looking at this story specifically and researching it to like look
Maybe
at the
we could
Wizard
do
of
a
Oz, it's crazy.
maybe we could do a deep dive. That could be like the inaugural segment of the 30 minutes because some of these things the way we do them, it's easier if one of us talk. Like when we tend to interview people, both times it was easier to just kind of let me do it and let Cody because it's easier to have the other person watch. Like, hey, you're saying this a lot, or you're doing something repetitive, or provide essentially provide notes. And Cody, with his producer background, has indicated that that is his specialty. So,
So
um,
specialty notes.
and I'm not bothered by criticism. So it's not a big deal to me, and he knows what to say. I know how to interpret it. I grew up working on stages, so it's not a big deal. And you just sort of just do it's. I enjoy doing this, but it's like a work mode I go into when we're doing this, even when I'm having fun with it. My brain is like working. So I think we talked about doing this segment. I think it'd be really fun to do maybe a deep dive on the Wizard of Oz and this. And because if we do it this way, Cody was still producing, so we're doing it in this format. I would just be on the screen, but it would let us put pictures and visuals up with less chance of jamming everything up. And I can still take notes from Cody, and we would pre-record that for everybody, uh, so that you guys can have a nice immersive experience. But
Yeah, I think that would be fun because again, like I hadn't
it's really fascinating.
It really is because, like, some of it I was reading, talks about Dorothy and Toto, and that they are really friends fighting at the Wicked Witch of the West and flying monkeys. And that's, like I said, the difficulty of coming out and how they were all outcasts that kind of gathered together, kind of mirroring LGBTQ community. And then kind of they think the whole journey of Dorothy could be like the journey as a queer journey, and basically her like more rigid life where it's like black and white, and then all of a sudden it comes out in color, and it's so fascinating.
I will say, if that is a really, I've never thought of it that way, but I can tell you that when I came out and I kind of coming out as gay and realizing that I was not straight, it was one of those things that answered more questions than it created for the first time in my entire life. So I was fortunate. I wish I had known when I was younger, but I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I don't think I was emotionally or mentally ready to know that about myself, even though everybody else pretty much did.
Yeah.
But when I was in college, it can be a little scary to come out then, because you just kind of, it's a great place to get yourself in trouble, or for something to go really wrong. But the whole idea of seeing the world in more vibrant colors, that can mean some pretty ugly colors too. You see a lot of really ugly things, but if you have your eyes open, you can also see a lot of really beautiful, vibrant things that you may have missed before because you were so focused on trying to keep this straight, like male, female, 2.5 kids, picket fence, and an office job binary in your head, that's what you had to have, even if you didn't want it. That's the best thing for you, so that's what you got to do, even if it might have been detrimental to you. Which, me personally, that is kind of a hellscape. That's like seventh circle of hell nightmare for me. That would be my hell if I was part of Coven and died. Like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we may have found a title for you, and maybe a process of what we should do with your own show.
I think this sort of. We'll have to thank David for this one again, because he read it. He was just scrolling Twitter and found this. I love reading history on Twitter. I follow a couple of history channel tweets. I follow pop culture and history, because cities and major events in history, and animals in history. All sorts of themes and topics, not just modern pop culture, but every kind of a little bit of everything. One of my favorite subjects in college was Western civilization. I even took AP European history in 10th grade because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
So I'm an established geek. So I think it'd be really fun. We should do a deep dive on it, even if it's only a special segment we don't do often. But there's a couple things we could do deep dives on for a Monday segment that we could just record for those for history buffs that just want to hear it, or just want something to criticize me for. I mean, hey, join my family. They're not going to listen to it. Join on in and criticize.
You can do that, because now you can call us and leave us a voicemail, and we'll play it for everybody here. But you can do that. The number is 858-876-4256. Of course, you can also check us out on Twitter, both of us. I'm at Cody Rodriguez. He's at I'm Poetic AF. It's been a great episode, I think. Lots of news and interesting story here. A friend of Dorothy, and maybe we found Matt his own show now. That's exciting. But thank again, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you on Friday. Of course, when we have our show coming up, that will be Friday, 5:00 Pacific time, where we'll have our live show and chat with all of you in live time. I guess until tomorrow. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks for listening.
So, hey guys, we want to remind everyone that you can keep in touch with us on all of our social media channels, whether that is Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can do all of that at the Coma Cast.
And we definitely love to interact and hear from all of our listeners. All of this is not possible without you guys.
And if you don't mind rating our podcast on iTunes or whatever your preferred podcast provider is, just leave a comment. It's greatly appreciated.
And thank you for joining us.
See you next time.